Okay, good morning, Mayor and City Council, members of the public. Nancy Kerry, City Manager. Thank you for agendizing this item. You did ask back in November for us to bring back this issue in February. And what this issue is a review of the program, how it's been working so far, which we talked a little bit about in November. But we're also going to review the history, how we got here, and then you asked for an in-depth discussion on a variety of possible amendments to the program. The staff report in your packet and available for the public includes a more in-depth discussion on each of those amendments. I will give a brief summary of those. Each of those, I'll take them one by one. Also, the fiscal impacts of each decision. And I remind you that all of these estimates on fiscal impacts are based on what we know. This program has only been in place about 8 months, in some cases 7 months, so we don't have an entire year of data, and we continue to make estimates based on what we know. So as a background, the recession impacts resulted in revenues declining faster than expenses were reduced. In mid-2010, the city completely changed course. We just did a presentation in January about that, and it was a significant course correction. We were headed in a direction that we were not going to be able to recover if we didn't change the direction we were on in the path. At that time, we had a contract with a company called High Sierra Patrol. They managed parking for the city at a cost of over $120,000. By 2011, our structural deficit exceeded several $million, more layoffs, pay and benefits cuts, service reductions, and programs were eliminated. New funding strategies were sought. The community, staff, city council offered ideas and solutions, and primarily we're looking for methods to gain funding for maintenance and operations. You just heard last week on February 10th from our Public Works Department that our maintenance and operations, deferred maintenance alone for streets, is over $26 million. A new funding strategy was sought, and parking meters were proposed as a method to generate revenues for those locations to do maintenance, operations, and other infrastructure improvements. As a result, we did, as I said, change course. The City Council transitioned into what we consider now as a strategically focused organization, prioritizing needs, investing in infrastructure. In April 2011, parking kiosks were installed at Bellamy Court and Transit Way. Revenue projections exceeded what we had thought we would return, and our feedback at that location was fairly minimal. Expansion of the parking program was considered to provide new revenue source for maintenance and operations of parking facilities and parking program in whole, the parking program for the entire city. Additional revenue was considered as a funding strategy for needed infrastructure improvements. We held 16 public meetings between April 2011 and November on the paid parking program. Looking back, I think additional public meetings or outreach efforts in one manner or another could have been more helpful to the public to understand the purpose, the revenue, and where the money was being directed. Included in your report is each one of these meetings, a description. I'm not going to go through them, but they are in the report. Each of these meetings, the program in various ways was addressed, amendments, ordinances adopted or amended, or a new ordinance, locations changed based on public input and feedback. Hours and operations changed, fees were changed. And at the November presentation we gave you, we went into quite a bit of detail on all of the amendments that were made from the time they were installed at the expanded locations through November. I do note for the record, it was May 6th that we had a meeting at the Senior Center, which followed the contracts that were signed back in February. We'd begun to hear that there was some question and people weren't liking this program, and we held a meeting. So it's listed here as a public meeting. It wasn't a city council meeting. So the purpose of today's discussion is you directed this discussion back in November. You wanted an update on the program. You asked us to return to you in February of 2014 with options for various amendments, including costs up to a repeal of the parking kiosk. I make note also that today's discussions, including the fiscal impact, are not related to what has occurred since November regarding a voter initiative. The parking, that is a separate issue, as the mayor just mentioned. These fiscal impacts I'm referring to were based on council's direction as to what the amendments might cost and what an appeal of the program up to an entire repeal of the whole program. So, option one. There's always the option to do nothing today, direct us to come back, return with different amendments. There's obviously no fiscal impact for that. Option two are this variety of program amendments. And I'm going to go through them, and they are numbered the same as in your report, and the details are also described in your report. So in November of last year, I apologize for this PowerPoint, it's just not coming up very easily. In November of last year, we gave you a suggestion that we might redirect all revenues from the parking kiosks to infrastructure in the 2014-2015 budget. The reason for that suggestion was, one, the kiosks were doing better than had anticipated. In some respects, they were used more than we thought they were going to be used. There was going to be revenues in excess of just the maintenance of the program and the maintenance and operations of the facilities. And so we suggested if there is additional revenue, we have an awful lot of infrastructure needs in each of those areas. Possibly we could just redirect all excess revenues to improvements, not just maintenance and operations. Currently, each kiosk location has its own budget, and I'll describe that in detail a little bit further. Lakeview Commons has two budgets, Lakeview Commons and the boat ramp. The kiosk revenues cover maintenance and operations. Bellamy Court and Transit Way, kiosk and citation revenue covers maintenance and operations. And there's an overall parking program budget. Kiosk citation revenue also covers maintenance and operations, staffing, and other expenses for all of the parking management program. And when I discuss the cost to repeal, I'll go into that in detail. It's in the same section of your report. So my point here is that if we were to direct excess revenues from each of those locations, we would be recommending they go to infrastructure improvements in those locations or to the overall parking lots. Also, we were suggesting if you did have excess revenue, that those infrastructure improvements would be specific to those locations. So, for example, Lakeview Commons area and the boat ramp, there's an expansion lot as part of the Harrison Avenue project that's also on today's agenda. We were suggesting that under the Boating and Waterways Act, all revenue for that parking lot that was originally funded by Boating and Waterways, the revenue has to stay there anyway. So since we have a construction project in that area and we need revenue for construction, we could take excess revenues and drive that right back into infrastructure improvements. Bike path, we've heard this as a suggestion from Lakeview Commons all the way to Ski Run. Could there be funds from the Lakeview Commons area to help fund that? Lakeside funding for quite a bit of needs down there, including a construction of a parking lot, lighting, landscaping, signage, employee parking. Through this parking program, we've determined that there isn't really any employee parking. I'll show you in the next photograph that there's some suggestion that if we reconstruct that parking lot, we could designate an area for employee parking. This past summer, in order to accommodate a variety of needs down at Lakeside area, I might have misspoke, I might have said Lakeview a moment ago. It is Lakeside I'm talking about. For the Lakeside Water District, we designated an area for their employees separate from this parking location. We modified signs and gave parking permits and all kinds of things to different businesses to help accommodate their needs for either their guests or their employees. And street maintenance in each area. We just heard, as I mentioned a moment ago, on February 10th, our street maintenance needs are significant. So again, excess revenues directed to specific programs. We did also hear from you in November that maybe funding could be available for events at Lakeview Commons. event shuttles, support transportation, and so on. This is a rendering of what the new construction at Lakeside would have looked like. The street was going to be realigned to, right now, as you notice, there's actually more parking space than necessary between the fence and the street. So the street was to be realigned so that it would provide really one space on the street, beach side, and then angled parking. Where you see a straight line, we'd actually have angled parking or horizontal parking. Employee parking could be designated on either side of Lakeside. I will mention this, and I'll mention it again at the end. This was brought to your attention as a suggestion in November because we need to pave the parking where it's dirt parking right now against the fence. Under TRP regulations, allowed parking on dirt is not acceptable, and we let them know that we intended to construct this summer. If this goes before the voters, our recommendation is we don't construct and expend those funds until we find out if the voters approve that direction. So what's the fiscal impact? Our current budget utilizes revenues from kiosks for maintenance and operations. If parking program remains in place and the excess revenues beyond those are budgeted would be directed to infrastructure, that would be a benefit to our general fund. Our other recommendations back in November, just as a reminder, included that each area could set up a neighborhood investment committee that could decide over the years to come those excess revenues where they should be expended. They all have a variety of their own ideas. Lakeside needs visioning, landscaping, sidewalk, lighting. They have a whole lot of ideas they'd like down there. Tahoe area has their own ideas, and so we recommend really getting their input for any extra expenditures. And again, if the voters choose to continue this program, if it does go to the ballot, that's next on your agenda. Our recommendation is to set up a neighborhood committee to provide direction and input to you, recommendations on where those infrastructure improvements could be spent. Okay, option 2, we're still on option 2, amend and modify the program. An annual locals pass. So there's been quite a bit of suggestion about creating a locals pass. Our recommendation is if you approve that, let's keep it simple. This questions to resolve really come down to what does locals mean. I've heard a variety of recommendations. It's only for full-time residents. My question would be then are we going to verify their driver's license, or what's the administration side of it? Keep it as simple as possible. Is it El Dorado County and the city, or also Douglas County? They are also locals to the community, or did you want this only by California? So an annual fee amount is also a question for you to resolve. If you do move forward with this, our $40 recommendation is really $5 a day for 8 days. If you go down there for 8 times, you'd be paying $5 a day to park. Similar to the summer concert series, there's about 8 of those, so it's $5 to park. Unknown fiscal impact. It's hard to estimate what this impact would be. How many passes would we sell would be revenue we didn't anticipate on the positive side. How many times they used it to park in a paid parking stall, and for how long would be parking revenue we didn't receive. However, it's really a very strong interest among the community. They seem to have a lot of interest in wanting to buy this parking pass. So I think when you talk about return on investment, the community's interest in this may outweigh a negative financial impact. We just may have to see how it goes through the summer. There is a $6 cost to design these. They have a hologram on them. You would buy them each year. And that's the cost to design and ship. There's a variety of other places to buy them. We looked at, there's all kinds. This one's a very hard plastic. It hangs on your mirror. It's two-sided, faces outward with this picture and inward with directions to keep that on your visor. It can also be exchanged. You know, you have a family, maybe they just want to buy one. Hey, I'm going to go down to Lakeside or Lakeview. Can I use the parking pass? So it's very movable. Another recommendation that we've heard both from you and members of the public is on the hours of operation. Some of the suggestions have included that we match the sunset hours. In other words, sunset or it's dark in winter by 6 o'clock. Summer, it's light all the way till 9, 9:15, 9:30 even sometimes. Our recommendation, though, might be something like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., just to keep it simple. We have had recommendations on a flat fee or a reduced fee at Lakeview Commons. The kiosks allow you to change the hourly rate, but don't allow you to to create a flat rate. One of the other issues in terms of a flat rate could be if you're doing a parking pass and you're changing the hours, those two things together can provide what is basically a flat rate. You get a parking pass and you park there for, like I said, $5 for 8 times. The fiscal impact, there's a direct correlation between the reduction in hours to the reduction in revenue. However, the facilities are utilized less in the winter. Winter weekday parking is also very light, so you might consider having the winter be just Friday through Sunday as paid parking and free other times. I had our parking folks look at when do people actually pay to park. This is a revenue by the hour by all since the time the program started. I've circled 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. You can see those are when people are really parking. After 8 o'clock at night, it's very minimal, and before 8 a.m. in the morning, very minimal, to help you in making your decision. Okay, Venice Boulevard. There's been a lot of discussion about Venice Boulevard. Our recommendations in November included, the issue is really as much about the paid parking that's caused problems as it is about the boat and trailer parking. Some residents have indicated they don't want that boat trailer parking on Venice because they bike and it interferes in their bike lane because it's obviously a shared road. There's the issue that there's going to be a parking lot built down in that area, a new parking lot or expanded parking lot. Let's wait and see what happens till then. So our recommendation right now is to just eliminate this program. We told you in November. In summer, we only generated $15,000. It wasn't for the whole summer. It wasn't substantially utilized. It is highly utilized by the locals who like to walk there, park and walk at Cove East. It needs a lot more discussion. We also recommend going to Keys Homeowners Associations and going back to the local residents to say, really, what parking works there? What do they want? It's very important to the locals who park and walk at Cove East. It's important to the businesses there. It's important to the marina, and it's important to the association. So I think it needs more work. This is an interesting and very hot topic. Our parking citation fine amount is $55. It's pretty high. You violate any of our parking ordinances, and including the ones we enforce on behalf of the state, the fine is $55. The purpose, as stated in the report that's before you today, the purpose of the fine is to make it high enough that they don't want to pay the fine and they are discouraged from violating the parking rules, and they utilize the signs that are in front of them and the opportunities to park without getting a citation, but at the same time not make it so high that it creates such significant resentment, particularly among those who maybe didn't notice the signs or notice the way some of the paid parking program has been installed. Our recommendation is to reduce that somewhere between $35, $40. That still gets the point across and at the same time is not so substantial that it creates as much resentment. The impacts, obviously, reduction in fine reduces revenue, but the purpose of the citation is not just to generate revenue. It would be a positive impact to the community members. I think they would take a lowering of that fine amount well. And we've also implemented a citation warning practice. So we know that a lot of tourists and visitors use this new paid parking area, and they're doing a random sample that occasionally, based on a certain number of cars that go by, you can't choose who you're going to not give a ticket to, but create a warning that says, we noticed that you didn't pay to park, or we noticed you violated a parking. Next time, please be more aware of what you're doing, and today is your no citation day. So those are the variety of amendments we have heard about the program, and when I conclude, of course, you can go back to those and take them one by one. We were also asked for what is the cost if we were to repeal this program, and you directed staff to return with a complete picture of the whole program. An immediate repeal or termination of this program in its entirety today would result in a negative impact to the general fund of approximately $620,000. I'll describe in a moment where that number comes from in detail. It's described also in your packet. Part of it is the $191,000 still outstanding on the kiosks. We make an annual payment of $48,000, so there's been some confusion. I have said 191, and if it goes through the end of the year, why is it 140? That's because another payment would have been made. If we were to remove the program and repeal it today, that money that has been budgeted in this year's general fund would not be available and obviously would need to be subsidized from other revenue sources. Again, as I've mentioned, this program has only been operational, depending on which location, 7 and 8 months, so a full year of revenue hasn't been achieved yet, so I'll talk about that for just a moment. So as noticed on this slide, and described in the report, each of these locations either are, they're described in their own budget as shown here. Lakeview Commons, $62,000 budgeted in revenue from that location. It goes to maintenance and operation of that facility. If you recall, back in 2010 and 2011, as we were about to cut the red ribbon and open that facility, there was a lot of discussion that we didn't want that facility to fall into the same deferred maintenance as all the other facilities have. And so the new revenue for that location, it wasn't first thought of that it would be parking kiosks. We were just considering what locations. We originally discussed it as Reagan Beach, and Reagan Beach would maybe have enough funds to all those parking lots. Then the community made a clear case that the Reagan Beach is really a locals beach. It's their secret spot that we don't necessarily publicize very well. And shouldn't we move that to Lakeview Commons, which answered the same question as how we were going to pay for maintenance and operations of that facility. So in this year's budget, each of those kiosks for both parking lots have their own budget, so we could track it separately, see how it's doing, and whether it would cover all of the maintenance and operations. So on the boat ramp side, we included in expenses the TRCD contract. That's a contract with the Tahoe Resource Conservation District that manages the boat ramp for us. They did that last year. If this does go on the ballot and it doesn't succeed, we won't be contracting with them for this summer. We will then be trying to manage that boat ramp ourselves. It covers trash, water, sewer, supplies, and the temporary employees who maintain in both the parking lots at Lakeview Commons. There's the restrooms, concessionaires, and the entire facility. So the revenue, just from kiosks, not from any citations, was budgeted to cover that, and including $5,000 in launch fees. We don't get very much money in launch fees from the boat ramp because it's obviously not a great location for a lot of boats. It's more kiosk. I mean, it's more kayak, right? Bellamy Court and Transit Way, it also has its own budget, $85,000 from kiosks and citations. It funded some transfer to the garage and maintenance and operation tools, general fund, and general expenses. And then we have a budget called the Parking Management Program. It had previously been called Beaches when it was just, it was originally budgeted that way. We changed the title. That includes all of the remaining revenue from Lakeside and any other revenue we hadn't budgeted. There was some discussion as kiosks moves around where we had Paradise, Venice, so those would be in there, but we don't have it at Paradise now, and it hasn't been at Venice this winter. The expenses would cover the annual kiosk payment, overall program management costs for the entire parking program citywide. So we took revenue from a variety of sources into one budget, and it covered managing the entire program. In the last column on the right, it shows, well, what's the cost to the general fund if we were to repeal this right now? Obviously, the revenue would come out. Now, we've taken in a little bit of revenue through the winter. We only have those numbers through December, which are near the bottom. And then also we have some expenses. So between the revenue we've taken in and the expenses we've already expended, so a net of $28,000 would be off this total. So if you add them all up, it totals $648,000, which includes the $191,000 for the payment owed to the kiosk, minus what we've taken in, and we're estimating the direct impact of about $620,000. Now, since we did these numbers, we're now into February. This number is just an estimate. In addition, we've taken in more revenue if we look at the entire 7 and 8 months, $200,000 in kiosk revenue since the beginning of when those kiosks were installed. So if you look at that and then try to estimate 4 more months through the busy season, would we have achieved these revenue predictions? We think we're close. We really don't know because we didn't have early July last year and we didn't have June. But since we've taken in 200 already, we probably would get pretty close to these numbers. But again, it's an estimate. So the cost to the repeal the program today, approximately $620. Although revenues are exceeding the amounts that we budgeted, we still don't have the entire year. We budgeted less than what we thought we were going to get because we've had so many amendments. You'll see that the way I laid out the budget there, it was to address, by the time we got to September, we knew there were so many changes coming. We budgeted in each section. We don't necessarily are going to have all the expenses that we had. We've been reducing the amount of maintenance and operations costs if we didn't have the TRCD contract. That would be $25,000 or $20,000, depending on how many hours we use them. So these, again, are just estimates. As I note here, $191,000 owed on the kiosk. At the end of the fiscal year, it'd be $143,000. And the fiscal impact doesn't just include this year. If the cost to repeal the program would be ongoing as we prepare for the budget right now, we're in budget season or the beginning of it, that we would not have the revenue for next year. However, as on later on your agenda today, the opportunity for the voters to weigh in on that is a good opportunity to say, is this a funding mechanism that you want for maintenance and operations? If not, that's a good question to put before the voters, and that's next up on your agenda. The general fund will need to subsidize the revenue lost. So just in conclusion, I gave you a lot of information. The recession impacts caused the council to consider various strategies to develop new revenue streams. The paid parking program implemented to eliminate the contract that we had. Some of the years it was $100,000, some of the years it was $120,000, that contract. That's been eliminated. So when you look at the general fund cost to repeal the program, not included in those costs is if we went back to contracting out would be another actual expense to the city. In 2011, the kiosks were installed. 2013, the program was expanded. Modifications have been throughout 2013. Public interest in this program remains high. Today's proposed amendments include estimated fiscal impacts. And the amendments for fiscal impacts, such as those that are in construction, the construction of Lakeside, are recommended to wait for the ballot results before we expend any more money on the program. The costs for things like a locals pass, $6, it would really be correlated to how many people wanted. So I don't think that cost is really a concern. With that, I'll take questions.